think we'll be okay here. All right. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to start with some introductions, little welcome. We're going to go through your binders, which most of you picked up yesterday. Thank you everyone for coming and doing that. It was great to see all of you. Thanks to Tapa for hand delivering a few of those. There's a lot of stuff in there. Maybe you got a chance to peruse it a little bit yesterday. We'll talk about seed ordering. That's the next big thing that's coming up. So there's some information in your binder about that, but we'll talk about it in a little more detail. And then we'll get into the garden planning content for tonight. Have a little lesson in planning, talking about site selection, about garden layout and garden mapping. Then we'll go over the next steps for you guys, the next things that we're going to be asking you to look out for. So if you have questions during this, feel free to put them into the chat. We'll stop a couple of times and answer them. Ask that you keep them in the chat instead of unmuting, just because we got again, a lot to get through. We'll make sure we have some time for questions in a couple of places. Good. Okay, I guess we'll introduce ourselves first. So I am Hannah Hedrick. I'm the Education Program Manager at Grow Ohio Valley, who is the sponsoring organization for this program. I've been with Grow OV for about 5 years, and I grew up in Wheeling, grew up gardening, and really happy to be doing this back around here again.
And my name is Tapa. I am a farmer by trade. I'm found at the big Wheeling Agrarian Center, 20-acre property along the edge of Wheeling Creek that we hope you can come visit. I'm also working with the Education Department, Hannah, in developing workshops, a series of 10 workshops, which when you come to visit us at the Meadows Garden, just about 5 minutes walking from where we are now, hopefully you can see the sites where we set up workshop demonstrations to teach 10 different subject matters. Thank you for joining us.
Again, we're with Grow Ohio Valley. And if you're new to knowing about us, we're an urban farming nonprofit organization, urban and other types of agriculture. We've been around since about 2014, and we have several working farms in the area. We do educational programming in the community, just like this, and we operate the public market grocery store downtown. So you might have seen us around. The other main partner in this program is an organization called Grow Appalachia. And if you were part of this program last year, we called it Grow Appalachia, but kind of switched the name up this year. But Grow Appalachia, this is the organization that gives us our funding and our program structure for this program. So Grow Appalachia, it's an initiative of Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. And this is a little bit about them. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially they seek to impact food insecurity in Central Appalachia by helping as many Appalachian families as possible grow as much of their own food as possible, by establishing these garden programs at different sites throughout Appalachia. And we're one of them. So this is our second year being a part of the Grow Appalachia network. And we're really excited to be working with them and with you guys. So let's start by digging into the garden binders a little bit. If you picked yours up yesterday, again, you might have had a chance to look through it a little bit. And if you didn't yet, that's okay. I think I've heard from most people that still need to pick up. And either way, you'll also be getting a link to a digital version of all the documents in your binder. So just be on the lookout for that. I'll be sending that around pretty soon. But there's a lot of stuff in here. We'll be talking through a lot of it in detail tonight, and we'll be getting to some of it a little bit later at the next couple of times we get together and talk. But if you just start kind of look through the table of contents, you'll see we've got a contact sheet. It's got mine and Tapa's information, your local extension agents and family resource networks. It's got that participant agreement that when you picked up your binder, you all signed and returned. Thank you very much. We've got that program schedule in there, which we'll look at again in a second. Some information about soil testing, some information about fencing, which we will not talk about tonight, but we will be talking about soon. Then info about the crops and things that will be available to order. And then most of the other information is tools to help you track your planting and harvesting. And then some general gardening knowledge down here with the grower's manual. So again, we're not going to talk too much about the harvest log and the harvest tracking tonight, but I will just note that those are going to become very important once we start growing and having things to harvest. We need to track harvest because Grow Appalachia requires that we track that and return that to them. So we'll be talking a lot more in depth about that, probably the next workshop. There's just a snapshot of the program schedule. You all made it to the first one. Congratulations. We'll generally try to have these group workshops on the third Thursday of the month. And if there's a supply distribution associated with that, we'll try to have that on the Wednesday before. I think for the most part, that's how it's laid out. These dates are subject to change, dependent on the weather and supply availability, but hopefully we'll be able to stick to this. Thinking specifically of the transplant pickup, that might be a little bit, just depending on when those are ready, but we'll keep you in the loop if any changes need to be made. Our harvest logs that I just mentioned, those are going to be due on the last day of every month. And it's super important that we get them returned. We won't have one due in February unless you guys have started growing something. I don't know, that'd be pretty amazing. But we won't have one due in February. We might not even have one in March. Last year, we didn't have a lot of people growing things by the end of March that were ready to harvest. But we'll definitely have one in April. And if you do have something before that, just ask that you make a note of it. And then blog posts. So blogging is something that Grow Appalachia asks us to do. We put out one blog post a month for them. And we like to pass that responsibility on to you all. So if you are someone who likes to take a lot of pictures, maybe likes to write a little bit, and you want to sign up for a month to contribute a blog post, we would love that. So if that sounds like you can send me an email and I'll get you on the list.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so for seed ordering, this is a big important announcement here. After this session, after we get through all of the garden planning information, you're going to just want to think about what plants are going to work in your space. You've got the crop varieties that we have available. We've already ordered these seeds, so these are the varieties we're going to have for you guys. And you've got that order form in your binder as well. We're going to try our very best to get these in by March 4th, which is a week from tomorrow. And that's kind of a compressed timeline, but it's pretty straightforward. So if you would just do your best to take a little time and think about what varieties you're going to want and get those in by next week, that would be amazing. And if you have any questions about any of the varieties or any of the processes, feel free to let us know. So we've got a couple of ways to return things. Like I said, we've got these physical binders that you guys got yesterday. It's got that paper order form. And if you're more of a paper person, you can fill that paper copy out and return it to us. I think I had the address of our office on the last page. So if you really want to, you could mail this to us. That might be the least practical way to do it, but you could. You could also take a photo and send it to us, or you could fill out this online order form over here that I haven't sent to you yet, but I will send to you very soon. So what I would actually probably recommend is going through and filling out your paper form. And then if you've got a good handle on Google Forms, you can go through and just input your answers into there. That's the most efficient way to get us the information. And if you have any questions, again, you know how to get a hold of us. All right, so these slides in the video, we are recording this session tonight. These will be posted for your reference. So like I said, we're going to be covering kind of a lot of information, but you don't have to worry about like furiously taking notes or anything, because we're going to share these for you to reference later. So you can just absorb as much as you can. Think of any questions you want to ask, and look back at this later if you want to. So here we go, ready to get into our garden planning workshop. A little preface on growing a garden, a little reflection. It's an exercise in patience, for real. And experience is the best teacher, meaning that you may have some ups and downs. It's not always an instant success, but you can always learn from the things that you do in any given year. Do your best to keep really good notes, because that's how you remember what you did. If you did it really well, you might want to do the same thing. If you didn't do it so well, you might want to change it for next year. But it does get better, and it does get easier every time you do it. So we're always learning how to improve. Any other sage advice you want to say there?
No, that covers it. Just that, gardening is considering the fast pace of life today, it's a great way to kind of center yourself and balance things out so that you're in harmony with the rhythms of nature. So good luck.
Good luck. So the things we're going to cover with the garden planning content tonight are site selection. I know a lot of people already have spaces that they've been working on, but some people don't. So we'll go over things you want to look for in picking a good site. We'll talk about preparing to work your soil. There's a couple different ways you can go about that. We'll watch a little video on garden layouts, then talk about planning what you want to grow and where you want to grow it. So for your site selection, we just wanted everybody to know that you can grow things where you are, even if it's not the perfect spot. There's a lot of things you can do that can help either improve your spot or make the best of it if it's in really bad shape. And we'll talk about some of those tonight, but also going forward, we'll have a few like specific techniques you can use on hills, or talk about containers a little bit. So with your site selection, these are some qualities that you want to look for in your ideal garden spot. You want something that's relatively flat. There are ways to kind of improve hilly areas. I know a couple of you do have pretty hilly gardens, looking at you, Miranda. But if you don't have a flat spot, there are things you can do, such as terracing, which we'll talk about probably another time, but we will talk about it. You want a spot that receives at least 6 hours of sunlight every day, and that's really important because that's what your plants are going to need to make the food to grow. And morning light is ideal, a little better than afternoon light. You want it to be close to a water source. This is super important. If you can avoid it, you don't want to be carrying water like in watering cans across your whole yard to get to your garden, or having to like truck water into somewhere. You really want it to be close to a watering source, something that you can easily access and get that water to your garden. You want to make sure a shovel goes down at least a foot before hitting something, meaning you don't want to establish your garden on like over a concrete pad or over really rubbly, rocky soil, unless you're planning on building it up instead of digging down. And then just a note that if there's a lot of moss in your space, that might indicate it's got excessive shade or acidic soil or poor drainage.
Yeah, the point of does your shovel go down a foot? If your garden hasn't been worked previously, it's you go out there and try to dig a foot down first time, it might not happen. So it'll be difficult for the shovel to penetrate. So don't be disheartened by that. It might just mean that because it's a spot that was never a garden before, that it's going to take a little bit of fluffing and aeration before you can get down a foot.
And that's a bold thing for us to say, actually, as a group that has worked to establish gardens on old building sites with really poor soil with a lot of chunks of debris in them. So it really can be done, but like Tapa said, you do have to be prepared to do a little bit of work.
In fact, one of the 10 workshops that we're presenting this year is called lasagna, no-till lasagna gardening. And we'll talk about that later.
A little bit more on your site selection. You want to make sure your site's not in a flood zone. It would be very, very sad if after a heavy rain, your crops all got washed away. So if your yard looks like that photo on the right after it rains, if it looked like that last week, probably not the best spot to dig in and put a garden. You might be able to get away with something like containers, but probably not a big field. And you also want to avoid your septic drain field. If you know where that is in relation to your house, you don't want to be digging around those pipes. So maybe if that's not something you know where that is in your space, see if you can inquire about that. And you just want to be kind of aware of your trees as well. You don't want to be too close to trees for several reasons. The trees they tend to be really heavy feeders, so they'll suck all of the water and the nutrients away from the plants in your garden. And they also can shade the plants out. So if you've got a tree with a big canopy, that's going to cast a lot of shade and prevent your plants from getting the sun that they need. And then some trees, like walnuts, for example, are toxic to some other plants. It's one of their mechanisms of survival. Any on that?
Yeah, walnuts give off a toxin that is known as allelopathic, which means it disrupts the ability for other things to grow. And of course, you know walnuts because obviously every year or sometimes every 2 years, they drop walnuts. But just be aware of that. And sometimes you might even find, you might be in a spot where there was a walnut tree, and that soil may not have, may still have the residual effects of that. So just to be conscious of that.
You're probably going to be learning a lot of things about your land as you go through this process, if it's a new process. So then we're going to be preparing to work our soil. And I'll let Tapa talk a little bit about this, but when we say preparing to work your soil, some people may think of tilling, but there's also some other ways to do that as well. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, when we get the applications in, 30 applications, it seemed to me, as we went through each application, that about a third of you are on, have garden sites that have previously been garden sites. That's great. That'll make things much easier. If that's not the case, if you're breaking fresh ground, and as you look out there, once the snow melts and things thaw out a little bit, you're going to find that it's pretty compacted soil generally, because the rain pounds it down, or someone may have parked a car on it at one time or whatever. Or it may be just fine, but it's grass covered. And grass covered means thick sod that's thatched underneath. From the surface is nice green grass, but underneath it's interwoven root systems that are rather difficult to get out. So one technique for doing that works in about 2 to 3 weeks is to simply tarp it. Find a tarp, ideally something that's 4 milliliters, I believe it is. Millimeters rather, I'm sorry. 4 millimeters thick, and lay that out over the area that is your proposed garden site. And upon laying it out, don't just lay any old thing on top of it. You really have to seal the edges of it so that neither air nor light can get under it, nor a stiff breeze can pick it up where there's a weak spot and flip the whole tarp up. If you don't do that, if you leave any room for light to get under or even air to get under, it retards the whole process of killing the grass under there. And generally speaking, the best plastic to use, if you don't have a tarp, is clear plastic, believe it or not. It actually heats up more than black plastic. Now that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. White or clear or slightly translucent plastic really snuffs the weeds out. Again, as long as you've really sealed it on the edges. If you don't have that, the black plastic also works fine. And then in addition to that, of course, if you're not doing that and you want to do it with hand tools, I would recommend, depending on your garden size, you just take a little bit at a time. Do 5 by 5 square feet every day for 4 or 5 days, and you've got it. And if while you're digging, you're noticing that you're bringing up really thick, light brown clay or gray clay, you might want to reconsider that garden site, or I wouldn't flip the soil and put the clay on top. So you can loosen it, but if you completely invert it, you're bringing up soil that is not conducive to germination as much as obviously topsoil is. So it's a little tricky. And if you need any help with that, understanding what your soil profile is and how to proceed, we'd be happy to answer those questions for you. If you're digging, that is.
Yeah, this is where it starts to get a little more complicated than putting seed in dirt. Just understanding your soil that you have. And we will talk a little bit more about soil health probably in the next workshop. We're not going to get into it too much today. Just to say that if you want to get a head start on preparing that space, and it needs to be prepared especially if you're starting with grass, start to smother that out as soon as you can. Can't do it for too long. And then we'll talk about, some of you brought up tilling already, and it might be tilling with a rototiller, but there's also top of the house a variety of hand tools that we'll eventually talk about that can be used to turn your soil down to a simple shovel. You can shovel it up by hand.
In that regard, we have another work of our 10 workshops this year. One of them is called The Right Tools for the Right Job. So sometimes tilling is counterproductive because it homogenizes the soil. It breaks it up in such fine soil particles that when it gets rained on, it just kind of compacts into a very thick density. And by comparison, if you use hand tools, and that's what this workshop shows, is some of the options of hand tools that you have to work with, you aerate and you make a condition that is very microbiotic friendly. In other words, real gardening is not feeding the plants, it's feeding the soil, and then they feed the plants. So how you work that soil has a lot to do with the rest of the season, as far as the root systems of your vegetables being able to access the nutrients that are in the soil, because there's enough oxygen in there for those microorganisms living in the soil to prosper and to multiply. They are the real farmers, actually. They're the ones that are breaking everything down, the minerals and the other components of soil, in order to feed the root hair systems of each plant. So the preparation of that soil in the beginning is critical. So please think about that.
And one of the first steps that you can take to start to understand your soil is getting a soil test done. So we in West Virginia have access to free basic soil testing through WVU Extension. I know some of you got this done last year, maybe even if you weren't with us, you've gotten this done before. But essentially you can mail in a sample of your soil, and I believe that report will tell you a few things. It'll tell you your pH, it'll tell you about your nitrogen and phosphorus, and I think your calcium needs,
Potassium.
and your potassium needs too.
These soil samples that WV, West Virginia University does for free, are kind of an indicator of what's going on, especially the pH in the soil. If you want something a little more refined, so you know the other micronutrients, of which there are 13, things like boron and copper and like that are critical to healthy nutrient-dense plants and production, there are other labs that we can inform you about that also do that, but they don't do it for free. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, we have used Logan Labs locally to do that, I believe, but we're asking everyone to at least get this soil test done through WVU. And we have included a little kit in your binder, pretty basic kit, but there's that instruction sheet that kind of goes over the soil sampling packet. We'll tell you how to move through that. But essentially, we've put 2 little Ziplocs in your binder. You're gonna fill the smaller one with about a cup of soil, write your name on it, and fill out that sheet that's at the back of your packet. And you can look on the website, the WVU Extension website, for any answers to questions about how to fill that out. There's a couple of questions that can be a little confusing if you've never had your soil tested before or never thought about your soil. But fill it out to the best of your ability, put it in that Ziploc, and you can either mail it off yourself. The address is on that form that we included in your binder, or you can bring it to us. We'll be accepting soil samples at the seed distribution on March 16th. So if you want to save the postage and have us mail it, you can bring it then. We can't accept soil samples after that date because we're going to be sending them right off. But if you want to bring it to us, then we'll send it for you. Otherwise, you can mail it yourself. And there's, in your binder, there are instructions about how to take your soil sample. So you can read over those. If you have any major questions, obviously feel free to get a hold of us. I think we are this year going to enlist the assistance of our extension agent here in Ohio County to do a little Q&A and help people interpret the results. So the kind of the trickiest part about getting this soil testing done is that what they return to you is a sort of complicated printout with a bunch of numbers and a lot of chemistry. And it is really helpful if you know how to understand it, but one of the best people to help understand that is our extension agent, Karen Cox. So talking with her about jumping on and doing a little Q&A with you guys. So you can stay tuned about timing for that. And yeah, when you're filling out, I'm seeing somebody was having issues with not receiving those results. I would just, at the outset, make sure that all your information is really clearly printed. And then if you do have an issue, you can feel free to let us know and we can help, hopefully help facilitate getting those for you. But I would also just try to contact them directly and see if maybe they can identify it by some of your other information. All right, we'll move on from soil here. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do is watch this short video that Tapa and one of our AmeriCorps Justice made. Do you have any preface for this video before we start it?
Yeah, this video was shot yesterday, actually, in the what's called the Meadow Garden, just below the office space here in Ohio Valley. And it's, you kind of have to use your imagination a little because it is March 24th, or I'm sorry, February 24th, and things are pretty barren looking, but we did our best to be very descriptive in describing the different types of layout for your garden, and I hope you enjoy it.
Right, and this video is going to be about 8 minutes, and then I believe right after this we're going to just go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So if you want to watch this, formulate your questions. If you have any questions, and drop those into the chat after the break. We'll take a minute and answer a few questions before we move on. But I'll just go ahead and start this now. Can you hear it before I go any further? Somebody tell me. Yeah, can you hear it?
Pretty low.
Okay, let me see here. I don't know. This is where my Zoom knowledge is failing me. I'm not sure I can change it so that it will do anything different. Maybe if I change this to
If we can't change this, I can talk.
let's see, what if I tried? Yeah, tell me if this works.
It's important to take into consideration
Still low.
how you're going to keep everything that you're planting this year safe. So there's many ways to do it.
Wait, I can try one more thing. I'll stop sharing and show this to you guys. Share this instead.
I got
Oh yeah, here we go. This is gonna be it.
Guys, I'm Justice.
That,
And my name is Tapa. We'd like to welcome you to the first in a series of workshops on backyard gardening. So welcome.
When you're planting your garden, it's important to take into consideration how you're going to keep everything that you're planting this year safe. So there's many ways to do it. First, you need to assess how big is your garden. Is it too big? Is it going to be unmanageable for you? Really consider your own needs in that. And then once you've decided on your garden, you want to secure your border. As you can see, I've drawn out here. Some ways we've done it in the past is we've laid plastic ground cover around the border to keep the weeds down. We've put up T-posts and put wire fencing up and chicken wire that is laid on the ground as well as a couple feet up. And that's to help keep out groundhogs, to keep out deer, to keep the weeds at bay. You can use cardboard around the border as well. There's many different ways to secure it, but if you don't do that, you're going to lose everything that you've worked so hard to do. So once you have your border protected, you've got your garden, you can start thinking about, how am I going to walk through my garden? So what paths do you need? Do you want to have one right in the middle of the garden? Do you want to have some side to side? And if you do something like that, you've ended up splitting your garden up into really manageable spaces. And that allows you to experiment, how do you want to plant your garden? So these are 4 different ways we're going to talk about really quick about how you can plan out your garden. The first one I'll show you down here is square foot gardening. As you can see, we've taken twine, and you can take twine around a stick and stick it in the ground when you're doing this to help keep everything even. This is to help nicely plant things in the perfect amount of spacing. So these holes are small. You could plant maybe turnips or beets here, radishes. You can always make them bigger. And this is a really nice, aesthetically pleasing way to plant your garden. Another way to plant would be to utilize a trellis structure. So these are the T-posts I was talking to you about when you use your garden. This is a really sturdy way to pound them into the ground, and they're not going to go anywhere. You can use conduits or pipes across horizontally, and then this is just a plastic mesh fence, but you can also use that same twine that we used for the square foot gardening and just tie it up horizontally and vertically. That way viney plants like cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, or peas can climb up, and then you have, again, a nice aesthetically pleasing vertical garden. Then this year we're going to have some options for perennial planting. So if you're interested in having plants that grow multiple years, we'll have a list for you to choose from. So planting perennials is going to be an option. Maybe you want to have some space in there for asparagus or blueberries, or whatever you decide. And then the type of planting here at Grow Ohio Valley we utilize the most is row planting. This makes it nice. You have really clear defined walkways between your rows. You have areas that you're mounding up here to create the rows themselves, using different layers of compost and soil amendments and wood chips laying down there. And again, this just looks really nice. People come in and you have everything in a nice row. Yeah, so these are a couple different ways that you could plan out your garden. There's a few more that we're going to show you here in a second. All right, guys. So as we talked about down there, there's many different ways to plant your garden. Maybe you don't have any land at all. This is a good way to save that space, but you can still participate in growing through container gardening. Basically, all you need is a simple structure on your porch, on your patio, anywhere where you can find a space. What we've done here is with cinder blocks and with wood planks. And then you just need pots. So we've organized them from smallest to largest. So things up here that I'm going to plant that are really big, like tomatoes, I don't want them to shade out my little crops like lettuce that if I wanted to plant down here. You can obviously use containers that you buy from a store or that you have lying around, or what we've done up here is you can utilize 5-gallon buckets. All you need to do though is to drill some holes in it, as you can see here. That's going to help with drainage, obviously. So right now, since it's February, we don't have anything planted in here, but instead of wood chips, what you're going to want to put in your pots are potting soil. Now, the reason we're using potting soil, which is a mixture of perlite, mushroom compost, and peat moss. So the reason we don't want to use our native soil is because it is too thick for the pots, too heavy for the pots for things to grow. And a lot of people will grow things like carrots in pots for the fact that they need a lot of deep space. So if you have a garden that's, you've done a lot of work building it up, maybe it's not deep enough for carrots, container gardening is a big option. So you'll use a mixture of this potting soil, pot your things up in your garden, make sure they get 6 hours of sunlight, and a couple months later, you'll have some potted garden plants. All right, guys, so lastly, I want to show you all succession planting. This is a type of planting that you'll utilize in any type of garden planting to make sure you're maximizing your harvest throughout the year. And all it takes is a little planning in the off season and throughout the year to make sure you're putting things into the ground when they need to go in, when they come out of the ground, and what kind of plants can grow well together and what not to plant together. So one form of succession planting is companion planting. So for example, here we have lettuce seeds and radish seeds, which we would plant here in the early spring. So we'll take our lettuce seeds and we'll read our directions. We'll know how much to space them. We'll do them about a couple inches apart. And we'll sprinkle a couple in there, make sure that they germinate. And then we'll take radish seeds and we'll intersperse them between the lettuce seeds. So the reason we're doing this is because the radish seeds will take about 20 to 30 days to fully mature, while the lettuce will take a little over a month to mature. So that way you're getting a harvest in between your plants, not just the plants themselves. And this can work with many different varieties. Do a little research. Sometimes we plant spring onions between our greens as well, because they'll pop up and they don't shade the plants. So just do a little research in that. And another form of succession planting here is to plant plants that are regenerative. So this type of lettuce here, if I take this and things like Swiss chard and kale, if you cut them, they'll grow back. So if I take my knife here and I take off and leave just the bottom part here of the plant, in a few weeks time, this will grow back. And this you could do 2-3 times, maybe more, but the taste will start to get a little more bitter as the times go on. But you can get multiple harvests out of that. And that's just a way to extend the life of your plants and extend your growing season overall. So thank you guys, and we'll see you later.
Okay, that's enough banter. All right. Okay, so did you want to say anything about that before going to the break?
Yes, before we go into the break, I want to clarify one thing that Justice brought up, and that is about container gardening. He said that we don't use native soil, but rather we use a mix of mushroom compost, perlite, which is kind of a white rock dust, and peat moss. And that's true. But the reason we don't use native soil is not because it makes the pot too heavy to lift. It makes the root systems, it's very difficult for those root systems to penetrate soils that become hardened or dense in the pot themselves. So that's really the reason. It makes the growing of the plant, it enhances the growing of the plant because they're in soft soils where the roots can easily penetrate. The other thing he didn't mention in there, besides the peat moss, the mushroom compost, and the perlite, is a little bit of organic fertilizer, be it from compost or well broken down chicken manure or well broken down cow manure, something that's adding nutrition to that mix.
And a few of you mentioned wanting to start with containers this year. So if that is you, you're looking to do the bulk of your gardening in containers, or even just a few, we'll touch base with you, and you could reach back out to us. We might have some containers available for those of you who are going to be relying on that method. So we'll touch base about that a little bit later. But I know a few of you had mentioned that in your applications, so just wanted to get that in there. Okay, so it is, what time is it? It's about 7:55. So 6:55, sorry. It's about 6:55. So why don't we come back at about 7, and we'll knock out the rest of this. We've got a few more things to go through before we wrap it up for tonight. But just take a little break, get a little stretch, drink a little water, and we'll be back shortly. will start coming back. Give you guys a minute to get back with it here.
Well, in this one, I'll make one comment. Don't work wet soil.
You guys hear that? Don't work with soil. And I want to see people. All right. Okay. If we are ready to get back into it, let's just finish up these last few things before 7:30. I saw a few questions, not too many, a lot of more comments, I think, than questions. There was a question about trellising, and that the question was, will we be able to help build trellising? We'll be able to provide supplies to help you trellis and give some good instructions on how to construct them. We'll make sure that you're able to do it. And we'll have some information about trellising materials at one of our later workshops. We're not quite to that point yet. And then, let's see, can we post this to YouTube? Yes, we will be posting this within the next week or so. I'll make sure to share it out, at least to this email list, and try to get it uploaded sometime soon. All right. Will we cover composting? That is a great question. Not in this workshop, but I was thinking it might be nice to do a little, we're going to be doing a couple of like extra videos. We're going to be doing a couple of extra videos to supplement some of the topics that we're talking about in these workshops. And I think one of them will be composting. I think that's an important one to cover, but can kind of be a whole session in and of itself. So stay tuned for that. I'm hoping to get that in at some point pretty soon as an independent video. Let's see, worms. We don't have any right now. If you were wanting to do worms, I would probably just recommend ordering from Uncle Jim's or your preferred worm supplier. All right, we're gonna go ahead and keep going. So let's see, back to our site. Justice touched on a few things in that video, kind of brought up a lot of different topics. We're going to expand on a few of them here in a little bit more detail. And the first one will just be preparing your rows, your beds. This is where you're gonna, if you're gardening in ground, where you're gonna be planting your crops. So just a couple of notes about getting those set up is where we'll start. So ideally, if you're starting from scratch, you want your rows going east to west if your location is flat. If you're on a slope, you're going to want to orient your rows along the contour of the hill, meaning that you don't want one end of your row to be up high at the top of your hill and one end to be low at the bottom. Instead, you would want them to all be along the curve of the hill at the same level. This is going to help prevent all your soil from washing away if we get a lot of rain. And we do get a lot of rain, as we all know. So if you're going to be doing this gardening for a while, you're going to want to establish those rows into permanent planting areas and separate walking areas. So when you're measuring all this out and thinking about your beds, you're going to want your planting beds to be 2 to up to 4 feet wide. You don't really want to get much wider than 4 feet, because then it gets kind of difficult to maneuver around them. You can't reach into the middle without kneeling in the bed. So you don't want to go wider than 4 feet, but within the 2 to 4 range is pretty good. And then for your walking paths, 12 inches to 24 inches wide, so you can kneel or sit. You saw Justice sitting in the path in the greenhouse. And one of Tapa's favorite techniques to talk about is his rowing technique, where he'll just sit down in a bed and scoot along and plant or harvest or whatever that is.
Yes, it's a famous technique that keeps you from bending at your torso up and down, which wears you out like anything. So by sitting kind of almost like in a yoga position and thrusting yourself backwards with your arms as you move along planting, you save a whole lot of energy, and you're closer to your upper body agility is enhanced because your arms are right there, right next to the ground. So that's a technique we'll show you at one of the workshops.
It's an ab workout too, if you're looking for double duty. And for the paths, you don't necessarily have to do anything special. A lot of the ones you see are wood chipped, but as long as you know where you're walking and where you're planting, and it should be pretty obvious, that's what you're looking for. You just don't want to be stepping in those planting beds.
The reason for that is when you compact the soil like that, you push the lungs out. And again, the real gardeners, the real farmers are the microorganisms, the algae, the fungi, the bacteria that are living in there. So when you walk on it, you suffocate them basically. They don't reproduce. And when their numbers aren't constantly increasing because they have very short lifespans, it affects the fertility of your soil.
So don't step in your beds. You wouldn't want someone to step in your bed. Okay, so we've got our rows planned out, rows are established. Now we want to decide what we're going to put in there. And to make those decisions, we're going to do a little bit of planning. So why bother planning when you could just kind of wing it and throw stuff in the ground? Well, it helps with a lot of things. It helps you know how much harvest you can expect and when you can expect it. It can help you prevent diseases in future years by crop rotation, which is actually kind of a big deal. If you're planting the same things in the same spot every year, the diseases that affect those things are going to stay right there in the soil because they know that they're going to have the next generation of those crops that they can devour the next year. But by moving them around, then you can kind of prevent some of that. And also, we encourage you to plan because there are a lot of you, and we need to get all of you some seeds, and we want to make sure everyone has what they need. So we just want to encourage you to order what you know you're going to use. It's going to be a lot to think about, especially if it's your first time, but it does get easier. So when you're developing your crop plan, and this is what you're going to be doing this week, hopefully, because you're going to be trying to get your seed order in by March 4th. Just think through, this is kind of a thought train that you can go through when you're pondering what you want to put in the ground. And I know some of you probably already thought about this, but thinking about things like, what do you want to grow? How much do you want of each thing? When are you going to plant it? When can you expect to harvest it? Do you need to re-sow certain things? How much space do they need? And where will you plant everything? It's just a lot of questions. And then to narrow it down, what do you want to plant? If you aren't totally sure what things that you want to plant in your garden, you can go through this list of questions, like what do you want to eat? What do you really enjoy? What do you buy the most of? What do you wish you could eat more of, but you can't afford it? What do you want to try canning or freezing? You got to plan ahead if you want to be able to do that. And if you had a garden last year, what did and didn't do well? And is there anything new that you would like to try? So these are all things you can kind of ponder on your own. And again, this will be posted. You can refer to this, but if you're having trouble coming up with things that you would like to plant, just a little exercise to kind of spur some thinking. So when you decide what things you want to plant, you have to decide how much you're going to plant. And this is definitely something to learn, to get the hang of. If you've never gardened before. So we've included in your binder, there's a cheat sheet. We got this from another Grow Appalachia site. They included information about a bunch of different crops and kind of just a little summary of a lot of different characteristics of those crops. So like the spacing that they need. They give a recommendation of how many plants to plant per person in your household if you want to have enough to feed that person for a whole season. But again, this is totally a starting point. This may not be perfect for you. You may have grown some of these things before and are like, that's not how many works for my family. That's okay. This is just if you need a starting point, this is a starting point. You can refer to this. It's in your binder. It's got lots of different crops on it. So if you want to do any preservation, you can think about doing a little bit extra. So when are you going to plant it? Again, you're going to want to look at specifications for your specific crops that you're growing. But generally, there are 3 different planting times here in northern West Virginia, the Ohio Valley. We've got our early spring planting, which will be around March and April. And that's stuff like a lot of greens, those radishes that Justice mentioned. We've got our late spring, early summer crops in May and June. Stuff like tomatoes and peppers and all your summer things. And then we have our late summer crops, which will mature in the cooler weather, stuff like cabbage and things that like it a little bit cooler. And again, those details will be written on that plant cheat sheet or on the individual packets that you're going to be getting.
Those details will also be available via our workshops. One of the workshops, for example, is called the really early garden. And what we teach you in that workshop is how to prepare your soil in the fall so that when the rays of the sun hit it in March, you get 3 or 4 sunny days, it's warmed up, it's been fertilized in the fall, it's been loosened and fluffed in the fall, and the crops that can really tolerate cold weather, even snow, even temperatures like 14, 15 degrees are, for example, lettuce and spinach can do that. So that's one of the workshops is therefore called the really early garden. We're going to teach you that this year.
Yeah, that'll probably be one of the last ones we do. We're too late for it now.
Right.
But it'll really help get everyone set up for next year. Okay, so when are you going to harvest it? Again, you're going to check your packet to see what it says about the days till the harvest. There's also information about this on your plant cheat sheet. And you just want to make sure you understand that some of these plants, they're harvested once and then they're done. Stuff like broccoli and cabbage, root crops. So when you harvest those, you'll have that space available in your garden again. And then some plants have a harvest window of several weeks, stuff like tomatoes and eggplants. They'll just produce on the same plant for a little bit of time. Then they'll need to be replaced if you want a continuous harvest for the whole summer. Something like beans would be an example of that. You could replace it mid-season. And then some plants, like the ones Justice was mentioning in the video, some are continuously harvested until they're killed by frost. Stuff like those, the lettuce and spinach, chard. You can just keep on harvesting those until they are either killed by the frost or they decline in taste. And that can be for quite a while. Then,
I'm sorry, an example of that quite a while before they're finished is kale is a good example. We planted kale in late summer last year, and it got up to mature stage by November. And then it provided us with fresh kale, beautiful fresh kale from November, December, January. We were still picking kale. This is out at the Big Wheeling Agrarian Center. So the timing of things and understanding the growth patterns of certain specific vegetables is key to keeping a continuous harvest coming in.
yeah, and some of that, there's also a lot of information about that in your intro to organic gardening packet inside your binder. There's profiles on a lot of those crops if you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into any of those. Oh, and so how often we want to replant it? Some things you might want to replant. Sometimes you might prefer to just do one sowing and then you'll be done with it. But there are a lot of things that you can plant multiple times per season. Those, mostly those one and done crops like the radishes, carrots, things like that. And head lettuce too. If you like certain types of lettuce where you harvest the whole head, you can actually plan to have lettuce for the whole season by succession sowing it, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So this is just an example. We won't get too in the weeds here, but an example of succession sowing lettuce, a type of lettuce, not the kind where you're just cutting the leaves continuously throughout the season, but this would be a lettuce that you're harvesting the whole head. So lettuce takes about 5 weeks to grow. So you only need space for about 5 weeks of crops, right? So if you want to harvest one harvest of lettuce per week, you can do that by just harvesting one of these squares. And then once you harvest, you can replant it. And by the time you get to the end, you'll have a new head of lettuce grown. That's a little bit of an expert level. If you are interested in succession planting, you have more questions, that's kind of an advanced topic, but definitely you're welcome to try that if you want to. It can be a really efficient way to use space in your garden, especially if you're going to be consuming a lot of produce. That's just a little example of that. Oh yeah, this one's, so some different varieties of different crops take longer to mature. So if you want to kind of stagger the times of maturity for your different varieties, you could choose, they give the example of broccoli. You could choose a broccoli that matures in 60 days, one that matures in 80 days, and one that matures in 100 days, so that you'll have new broccoli to pick at all those intervals. That's another way of kind of extending your harvest dates. And then so that might be the last thing. You want to think about how much space each thing needs. Again, we can look at that cheat sheet or your seed packet to look at your spacing. And when you're thinking about spacing, you want to think about the mature plant, right? So when they're small, just little seeds, it's easy to want to try to put things really close together. But you want to think about how big that plant is going to be when it's fully grown. So stuff like squash is really viney, it takes up a lot more space, so they need 3 feet between the plants, whereas something like a tomato would need maybe 1.5 feet, and radishes can be really close together. So things are different, and you just want to think about how they're going to fit together and what kind of space requirements they're all going to need. And then finally, where you're going to plant it. So we'll encourage you to actually draw this out. I would say it really helps, especially new gardeners, if you want to just draw out your garden space and put those things where you think they're going to be in your garden. And you can get really detailed with this. You can be kind of rough with this. You can do it by hand, or you can get as in-depth as using an Excel spreadsheet. I kind of like doing that because I like to use my spreadsheets for a lot of different things. You can use like one little grid square for 1 foot and just move around your different crops in there. Or doing it by hand is totally fine. We included some grid paper in your binder for some sketches if you want to take a stab at sketching out what your garden's going to look like. It helps to do it to scale, just so you don't add extra space or lose anything. Then when you take it out to the garden, you're like, where's this extra space coming from? That's just an example of a plan that can be done in a spreadsheet. And a little bit of terminology. Again, you want to plan for the mature size of the plant. So again, with a lot of these things, they'll be growing in the rows. They might be growing on the ground, but there are also a lot of things you might want to trellis. And Justice talked about the construction of that trellis a little bit. You want to make sure it is sturdy, especially for stuff like tomatoes and cucumbers that can be a little bit heavy. But trellising can be really awesome because it lets you grow your crops up vertically rather than taking up a lot of space on the ground. And that's good for a lot of reasons, for those space reasons, and also keeping things off contact with the dirt. So you can also, if you're planting things that are growing up, you can also plant things nearby that are kind of more low to the ground. This is another little companion planting situation. So if you're, for example, maybe planting beans that are going to be trellised up tall, you could plant something at the base, like a leafy green that uses a lot of nitrogen, because beans and peas put nitrogen into the ground. They're nitrogen fixers. So that'll make your greens really happy. So we talked a little bit about that companion planting with Justice. You can mix your crops together. I would just do a little bit of research on that, as he said. Diversity is good. You don't have to worry too much about the particulars. That's Margaret. Margaret's one of our farm hands. She's demonstrating companion planting by showing you this lettuce intercropped with, it's like green onion or maybe garlic. It's hard to tell in that picture.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about companion planting?
Yeah, good companion planting is, as Justice explained, radish planted with almost anything. I use radish kind of like little guards, like little sentries, because they come up much quicker than everything else. And if you have an issue, and you will, with insects, especially these little flea beetles and leaf hoppers, if you have radish interplanted as companions to anything, they will go after the radish. The young radish leaves will look ravaged, but they won't touch the other thing. Not in all cases, but generally it's a good principle to understand that until the weather gets real hot, radish is a really valuable companion in the garden.
Yeah, that's a good one. Can be a trap crop for other pests. And we'll get to talking about pests at a later workshop too. There are lots of ways to try to deal with them. And then, man, if you end up with more things you want to plant than you can fit in your space, you can do one of two things. Either till up more space or pare down what you want to grow. If you find some extra room, you can adjust your garden size accordingly. Either make it smaller or decide to plant a few more things.
If I were you, I wouldn't plant more than you can maintain. When you plant more than you can maintain and it turns to weeds, that can be very discouraging. So when I've helped people put gardens in, I always tell them, don't dig up more ground with a shovel than you think you can actually handle and maintain nicely.
Yeah, that's good advice. If you, especially if you've never gardened before, if you're brand new, starting small is not a bad idea. But regardless, throughout the process, you just want to try to keep really good notes. Even the best laid plans can go astray, as it says. But you want to be able to remember those things when they happen so you can learn from them and do them differently next time. So write down all the things you do. Keep track of what you actually planted and harvested, especially if it's different from what you said you were going to do in your garden plan. Make sure you update stuff. Make a note of when things died and what they died from. Was it that they just ran their course, or you harvested them, it was time for them to be done, or did they get eaten by pests, poor soil, did they get scorched and wither? Just want to keep notes about all that kind of stuff.
The greatest nemesis in your garden, as far as things destroying your plants, is going to be insects. And so we have a workshop called Insects Be Advised. We're not taking it anymore, and we know where you live. And in that workshop, we show the various kinds of organic pesticides that can be used judiciously in order to keep specific insects off of very specific families of vegetables. That's one of the most important workshops that we're teaching this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about pests. They are insect pests, particularly. You can fight them, and being an organic grower doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to use any kind of insecticide or pesticide. It just means that we're going to use organic ones, so ones that are not going to cause harm to the environment or not synthetically made. And this is an organic gardening course. I don't think I said that at the beginning, but this information in particular is all going to direct you toward organic gardening techniques. So yeah, we'll talk a lot about pesticides and pest control at a later time once we get some plants to protect. So, okay, let's see. Now it is 7:30, and that was a lot of information. Again, I will post these slides and post this video to share with you all if you want to refer back to it. But we've got a few next steps, maybe more than a few next steps. But the next things that you're going to do after we're done today, in the next coming weeks, take a stab at creating your garden plan and maybe a drawing of it. You're going to complete your seed and plant order form by March 4th, which is next Friday. If anybody thinks that's going to be an issue, please let me know. We'll try to make it work, but we really want to have those by March 4th if possible. Then we're going to do our next distribution of seeds and tools on March 16th. You'll see on your order form there's space to order crops as seed, and there's space to order transplants. And the things you're going to see as transplants are mostly going to be your nightshades, like your tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, and a few other things you can get as plants, but just know that there's a distinction between those two things on your order form. So the things you're getting as transplants will be a little bit later. Those will be closer to the first week of May. So then you're also going to take a soil sample and either mail it in yourself, or you're going to bring it to us on March 16th. And then we'll just note that there is no group workshop like this in March, but we're going to be releasing a couple of additional videos with information on tools and seeding. And also, I think, look at my schedule here. I think March is also when we've got our garden visits scheduled for. I just want to confirm before I say that for sure. Yeah, so that last week of March, we're going to be scheduling visits to your gardens, and at that opportunity, we'll take that opportunity to deliver fencing for those of you who are going to be requesting fencing, and we can look at your spaces, answer any questions. So I'll be sending some more information about that coming up here. And of course, please contact us with any questions that come up. Again, I know that was a lot of information, and it's getting to be a little later in the evening. So take some time, digest that, and get in touch with us if you need us for anything. I think if anybody needs to go, I've seen that from a few people, you can go. If anybody has any burning questions, we can take a moment and answer a couple of questions. But other than that, I'll let you guys go. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for your kind attention.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.